Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Is everybody having a great day one to reInvent this year?
Yes.
Awesome. Good to hear. Thanks, everybody, for being here. So excited to have you here. By way of introduction, I'm Daniel Slater, and I've been at Amazon. Actually, tomorrow will mark my 17th year at Amazon. And primarily, my experience has been both on the digital media and retail side, where I helped launch our Kindle device and our Kindle global business, and moved over to AWS in April of 2020, just as the pandemic was hitting. My timing is impeccable, as always. But I've been at Amazon a while, and I've seen a lot of change at Amazon. And one thing that I've seen us really remain consistent and focused is really on how we structure and how we run teams at Amazon and AWS. And I want to share a little bit about how we do that, how we operate them, how we form them, the different types of teams that we have on Amazon, and how we govern them, and how that helps leaders lead beyond the line of sight, so that everybody at Amazon and AWS, every employee, is driving fast-paced innovation, are able to make high-quality and high-velocity decisions at speed, and are empowered to do so on behalf of our innovations for our customers. I'll overview some of the larger, maybe cultural background of why we've organized in this way, and then get deeper into not just how teams are run, and as I mentioned, different flavors of different Amazon 2 Pizza teams, and then share some specific mechanisms that these teams use to, again, help them keep the customer at the center of everything that they do and operate at scale and speed. And while I'll share all of this, I'll also have this one big caveat in that this is a way and an approach that's really worked for us at Amazon and AWS. And I'm not saying it's the best approach, and there are actually some drawbacks of how we form teams, and I'll discuss some of that as well. But while this has been very successful for us, I won't ever say that this is what you should be doing. Hopefully by sharing some of how we think through forming teams, leading teams, and some of the specific mechanisms that we use, that gives you ideas in your business about how to, again, one, keep the customer at the center of everything that you do in your innovation, and number two, really empower everybody at your organization to bring that innovation to the forefront every day. Great. What I think we all want to do in business is not just innovate. Anyone can innovate, and in fact, there's a really great and clever man who actually creates these great innovations, but they're kind of useless. And in fact, he has a site called Unnecessary Innovation, or Unnecessary Inventions. Has anyone heard of this gentleman who creates product and kind of puts it on? You have? Great. Like an example would be an umbrella that you can attach to your shoe for when it's raining. Now that's an example of innovation, right? But is it truly a disruptive innovation? Is it truly a necessary innovation? As you think through that, like how does that scale, right? It would be a better and more disruptive approach to perhaps create better material for your shoes that are waterproof and durable, and then can be expanded into other features or product sets besides just shoes. And that's, I think, what we all want to do in terms of organizing for innovation. Not just be innovative for innovative's sake, but to truly be disruptive. And there's a lot of beneficial aspects of truly disrupting your product or segment. And that is, number one, it keeps you as an innovation leader in your business. It helps encourage even new approaches and new lines of thought that add to your competencies as a corporation. It kind of creates new lines of growth in business, and really helps drive innovation, even as your company scales. So that's one of the things that Jeff Bezos, who was interviewed by Wire magazine, is really getting at with this quote here, that really as he was asked really what drives Amazon's innovation, it really comes back to truly being disruptive. And how you actually form teams, organize teams, and lead teams is key to remaining disruptive and bringing out that innovation every day. And in my view, there's really three aspects to how you create truly disruptive, innovative teams. This isn't, I think, rocket science. It comes down to people, process, and tools, or the culture a culture, creating a really durable culture that really is focused on the customer every day, puts them at the center of everything that you do. And organizing so that your employees really think about the customer, really own that experience end to end, is really going to foster this disruptive innovation. Certainly you need a robust set of tools as well. And for us, of course, that's AWS and the 200 plus fully featured services and offerings that we have. But in addition to that, teams need to have really hardened processes, or what we call mechanisms, to really drive consistent innovation, even as you scale and beyond the line of sight. And so as I go through this, I will spend most of my time on the culture and process part of this, but I do want to dig into just a little bit of the tools part. Now, there are so many different keynotes and sessions and ability for you to engage with people at AWS to have hands-on experience with some of our latest and greatest technology. So I'm not going to go over kind of our vast feature set. Instead, I'm going to tell you a little bit of the story about how we got to where we are and how that impacted how we thought about and restructured teams at Amazon. Now, some of you might have attended the earlier session on culture of innovation. Who here actually went to that earlier? Great. This is a concept that was brought up there, and I'll bring it up again and actually go a little bit deeper. Our journey to really create a robust set of tools really happened when we started to fail at it. Amazon, like a lot of .com companies that came about, was small and scrappy when we first launched in 1997. And at that time, we had a monolithic architecture, a technical architecture that centralized everything. All the business logic code was all in this monolithic architecture, which was incredibly useful for when we were small, when we had focused lines of business like books, and then very soon after, video and music. But as we started to scale beyond that, even within those businesses, as we started to add more businesses in Amazon, what we realized was we started to slow down. And a lot of those reasons why kind of are intuitive. If you have all of your code centralized in one place, what is going to happen is the dependencies that are inherent in that code are going to start to slow you down. There could be waits for deployments. If you wanted to launch a new service or feature, you actually had to go and really understand what the impact of that was going to be as you launched that. Sometimes I even had to find owners of that code to ensure that what you were launching integrated with it, didn't disrupt anything downstream. That alone took a lot of time. And what we found was that in our approach of trying to innovate constantly for customers, we just weren't moving as fast as we needed to be and wanted to be. So at that point, it was around the year 2000, we started to disaggregate this monolithic architecture. And we broke it down into what's now become known as microservices. And instead of having everything centralized, essentially we broke apart these big, huge databases into discrete entities. So there was a database for orders and a database for our inventory, another with customer information. And in front of those databases, started to build a network of microservices, really that were very hardened in terms of the API connections between them, where all the business logic was protected. But you were able to launch new services incredibly fast within this network. What you're seeing here, maybe for those in the back, might be a bit of an eye chart, but what you're seeing here is actually a piece of our EC2 business, or our Elastic Compute Cloud business. And each small blue dot in that image represents a single microservice. And you can see through the shading, that white between them, obviously these services call upon each other. And that's where that hardened API really comes into place. But you can also see that they're still independent. They're still discrete services that operate independently. And in fact, there's some that are highly aggregated and call upon each other, but there's also some at the edge that almost stand alone. And so what this means is, if you wanted to come up with a new feature or a service, you could launch into this new microservices network without having as much impact as you did when everything was aggregated together. And that just sped innovation. It allowed us to go from idea to execution and really learning about the services and being able to iterate it very quickly in an orders of magnitude faster. And that was the big benefit of breaking down our architecture into this microservices approach. Now, I think many people are familiar with Conway's Law. Have you come across this? I'm sure you have. Melvin Conway, a famed computer scientist, really came up with a very interesting and what we truly believe is a right concept of the fact that when you build an architecture, that architecture is going to be heavily influenced by the people who build it. In fact, this concept, this Conway's Law, is also known as a mirroring principle, in that your architecture is really going to be driven by the teams that use it and the nature of how they interact with each other and communicate between them, and vice versa. Your teams and the way they operate are going to be heavily dependent on what their architecture enables them to do. And so understanding this concept back in 2000, when we started to disaggregate that monolithic structure, we also knew at that time that we had to fundamentally change the way we were organizing in teams. So at that point in time, we did start to disaggregate our teams into what became known as Amazon's two pizza teams. And this is where I'm going to get a little bit deeper into the culture of what drove and of the thinking behind aggregating into these two pizza teams to complement the way we disaggregated our architecture. And if you've seen any of our presentations, if you've talked to anyone at Amazon or AWS, you probably have come across these, our leadership principles. One of the great things about the leadership principles themselves is that they form a very common vernacular that all of us at Amazon and AWS can use that really enables us to think through problems at speed and at scale and be able to bring in the right kinds of concepts and real deep thought around things when we have to make a decision. Business moves fast. You don't always have all the data that you wish you wanted. And that's where our leadership principles come into play. You'll notice that there may be some tension between some of them, like how do you dive deep and have bias for action at the same time? When you're launching a service, you're going to want to have that bias and move quickly to meet a customer need. But you're not going to want to do that without diving deep first, validating that it truly is something your customers want and need, focusing on the best part that is going to solve the biggest pain point for your customers, and then that enables you to move fast to launch. And you're not going to want to launch without, again, diving deep with what does success look like when you first launch, right? What are the measurements if you're maybe coming out with a pilot? What does the exit criteria of that pilot look like? Or if it's a first service, like how are you staying on top of how your customers are using it? Are there any additional use cases that have come up? So in this way, using these leadership principles for us really helps, especially as we scaled, really encapsulate the key things that we want every Amazonian to think through when a problem arises. And that enables us to make high velocity and high quality decisions. It forces us to inspect those decisions in a manner that's quick and efficient and balances what we think are the right things to focus on, and then move quick. Now, what does this have to do with two pizza teams? Well, I want to call out a few of these leadership principles that really defined how we thought through that approach and what was the most important thing to keep in mind as we disaggregated our teams and created this two pizza team structure. And the first leadership principle that I'll call out is invent and simplify, obviously because it is focused on innovation. But one of the key things about leadership principles is it really articulates what it means on a day-to-day basis. And you can see here from the actual verbiage, the language that's used here, it's not that we want our employees to be innovative and be speedy in bringing those to the table, new ideas from everywhere, but we expect and require innovation and invention from the teams. This is part of every day. We want to wake up and look for ways to be innovative. And it's pretty starkly outlined here of what that expectation is. We want to look around corners. We can't just believe that we know it all. We want to be inspired by what's going on in customers' lives and some of the other products and features that they really love, and really use that as kind of fuel to how we can help solve bigger and larger problems on behalf of our customers. And part of that also is to have that patience when we innovate, and organize in a way that we can enable anyone to bring ideas to the table, to start testing them early and often, and then help us then iterate as we go, and as we learn what customers like, what they don't, and that way really expand how we can innovate on behalf of our customers. So that's one key area that we want every two-pizza team at Amazon to really be both innovative and also simplify their approach. The notion of simplifying a team into a small unit is also a key part, and I'll go deeper into that a little bit as we go. So the second LP, or leadership principle, that I want to call out here is the notion of frugality. This is, especially in today's environment, frugality is key to running a performant business. But as it relates to teams, frugality is pretty key. As this leadership principle says, constraints breed resourcefulness and self-sufficiency and invention. And I love this. There are no extra points for growing headcount, budget size. It isn't just about a sign of the success of a team, isn't just its size at Amazon. It really comes down to what you are producing on behalf of customers. And I think that focusing on the frugality element of purposely keeping teams small, of breeding that constraint where teams now have to invent themselves out of a box and not just as the company grows feel that they have unlimited budget or resources, because it doesn't matter what company you're at or how big it is, no team has unlimited budget or headcount size or resources. So this purposeful attempt at really breeding this type of constraint into the way we thought through organizing teams was key to the notion of our two-pizza teams. Finally, the last leadership principle I want to call out is bias for action, and not lost on any of you here today that speed really matters in business. And you really need teams to be able to react quickly on behalf of customers, to really get in customers' lives in different ways and really own that customer experience so that they can not just be reactive to their needs, but also proactive, start to invent on their behalf based off of the knowledge that a team has about their own customers. And so this notion of really moving quickly is endemic to how we wanted to approach organizing teams. And that, again, all of those leadership principles were key to then forming what we call this Amazon two-pizza team structure. And this is where I'm glad we're doing this after lunch, because it would start to make me hungry. But at its core, Amazon two-pizza team really does two things. One, it helps foster ownership of the service. We are not asking these teams to solve multiple problems across multiple different customer sets. It really, and I'll talk a little bit more in terms of when we specifically talk about how we organize and the mechanisms that they use, how we do that. And that's a very key point about two-pizza teams. Their size, like having 10 or less people, really fosters that speed and that ownership of their customer. We ask these teams to get as close to their customers as possible, to instrument and really understand the data that they're seeing, but not just look at the data, also look at the customer anecdotes part of what's coming through and use that to really fuel, again, that innovation every day. And the second part of it really isn't just about size, it also is about breeding autonomy in teams. It's not just about like asking teams to be scrappy, move quickly on behalf of customers, but truly own that end-to-end experience from the start to the very finish. So I'm going to dig into a little more around how we actually do that in terms of the processes that these teams at Amazon and AWS use to foster this autonomy, this speed, and this ownership. Indeed, like what are the kind of what's and whys behind two-pizza teams? And I'll start off with some of the benefits of smaller teams. One is pretty self-explanatory and mimics what the benefits that we saw as we disaggregated our monolithic architecture. Having small teams focused on a single customer problem or a single set of customers decreases dependencies, right? They are not, as I mentioned, asked to solve numerous different problems. Having this single threaded focus on one area, on one service, on one customer set, really makes them the subject matter experts of those customers and really enables them to not just react quickly, know what's going on with customers, but as I mentioned, invent on their behalf. So that's one of the great benefits of disaggregating these teams that started around the same time as we broke apart our architecture. The second is how we ask these teams to stay close to their customers. As I mentioned, they have to own the full end-to-end experience. When I've worked at previous companies, I know, and this may be similar in your organizations, there might be a product management team who, based off of maybe customer data and what they see as an opportunity, will create a feature or an offering or a service, launch it, and then throw it over the wall for someone else, another team to manage. And for us, we want these teams not just to create, but to own. And that's a key piece, is that we don't throw it over the wall. These teams have to look over the service or offering throughout the entire life cycle of that offer and service. And what that means is that you also have to think through resourcing these teams correctly as well. Right? It isn't just about having the right developers and QA testers. You will need product and program managers on it. There have been times where two pizza teams that I've been on or created have other elements, like marketing was actually one, that because it was a core feature of the service. So again, as leaders of these two pizza teams need to ensure that they're resourced properly, not just at launch, but for the entire life cycle of the program. And then really the third part of it is really, driving this disruptive innovation through frugality. As this great quote from Jeff says, it really is around ensuring that there's an inspection mechanism within these teams that always look, how can we do things more simply? How can we move faster for customers? How are we not swelling ourselves so that we are taking on additional parts of this roadmap that start to slow us down and create conflict? Those where we see a team start to struggle under this huge roadmap, that might be a clue that we may need to examine how that team is organized and make changes to it so that we can preserve that single-threaded focus for that team. So those are some of the benefits of two pizza teams, but I also want to talk about some of the drawbacks of two pizza teams because it's not perfect. One of the interesting things, at least to me, is that most organizational structures, as you look through maybe kind of classical literature on how to organize teams, and whether that's functional or product-oriented, a lot of the literature around it is around maximizing the ability for these teams to interoperate and to communicate and making that more fluid. Well, for us, we actually want to purposefully minimize the communication between teams. That can be a drawback sometimes as you think through, like, where are there benefits between far-flung teams as you work together and find kind of like matrix benefits and offers that you can launch. A quick example from my own experience was the Kindle tablet device itself. You had a device that could deliver books and movies and music and the internet. It would have been fantastic to be able to sit down with disparate teams, and I was on the book side, with colleagues in music and those who were developing the internet features for that tablet and say, how can we get together and kind of create cool features that are cross-cutting like this? Well, that would take a lot of time and would also take focus off of our ability, let's say within the books team, to really focus on the book buying customer and develop features on their behalf. So the way we organize these two pizza teams actually minimize some of that communication. Some of the things that we launch in AWS I'm kind of not aware of them until you are, like today, as we're launching new features and services, and that's by design. We want these teams not to really focus on their customer and focus their ability to move fast on their behalf. And sometimes having that more matrix, pulling back and looking at where the commonalities and where we can build similar features together with other teams, that takes away time from focusing on any given team's own customer and inventing on their behalf. So that's a purposeful trade-off that we've made. Another is that two pizza teams aren't always appropriate for every need. I mentioned marketing was part of one of the two pizza teams I'm on, but functionally, marketing isn't always and normally part of these two pizza teams. It's a different structure, as is legal, that's kind of unto their own, right? One of the reasons is it's just more efficient to do it that way. If you think about, let's say, marketing, it would be highly more inefficient to actually have a marketing team for every single service rather than to find kind of like how we are marketing across a broader set of solutions for customers. Similar with legal, right? And how we address this within two pizza teams isn't actually having every two pizza team have a legal person or a marketing person in it, but actually have at least that person attached to a team as a kind of a dotted line structure, so that they too can be in those meetings where we discuss what is going on with our customers, how are they using our services, what their biggest pain points are, how are we thinking about meeting and looking around corners for future features or services for them. And in that way, while they're not part of this hierarchical structure for the two pizza team, at least they have that closeness to customers. And some of these can operate rotationally as well. I know that in some cases in the Kindle business, we had different legal people cycle through on a kind of a yearly basis. And so that's one of the ways that we at least bring that proximity to customers where they're not aggregated within this two pizza team structure. The last part is that we actually do risk some duplication of effort. If you have small autonomous teams running fast, just focused on their customer, not broadly communicating across a more matrixed design, you may risk duplication of effort or having two teams work on something that might be similar. And that is a conscious decision that we've made in our business. I'll tell you a story. At one point, it was around the time, maybe after that we started these two pizza teams, Jeff Bezos was in his office with Brian Valentine, who was a former senior vice president, oversaw a lot of our e-commerce business. And Brian was talking to Jeff about, hey, I'm seeing a lot of duplication, not just in our own org, but as I've been through these different business meetings, quarterly business meetings, I see some duplication going on in other areas of the business that's very similar to what we're trying to do. And so Jeff stood up and went over to the whiteboard and wrote this on it. And Brian was like, okay, Jeff, I understand mathematically what that means, right? But what are you trying to get at? And so Jeff said, I'd rather have two teams working on something than no team at all. I'd rather have two functional answers to a customer problem than none at all. And that was a good kind of look-up moment for how we organize these teams and need to take on sometimes some duplication in the approach in order to preserve any given team's focus on their customer and their ability to move fast. And I'll give a quick example from my own experience in Kindle. As we were building that device, one of the biggest features of it was being able to deliver books over the air. And if you thought about what our structure of buying on Amazon is, this is kind of how people bought books on Amazon, still buy books on Amazon. It's this notion of a cart, right? You find a book, you are able to then place it into your cart. You're able to choose some parameters. Maybe that's around shipping speed. Maybe that's around how you're paying for it, like different credit cards or applying gift certificates. But once you put it in a cart, you're able to still shop or you're able to check out. Well, for us at Kindle, what we wanted to deliver was what we thought was the most lovable product, not most viable product, the MVP, but we really wanted to be able to deliver any book ever published in any language, all in 60 seconds or less. And to do that over the air, we looked at how we would need to maybe change some of this cart-based system that Amazon was optimized for in e-commerce. And to do that would have taken a very, very long time. And we didn't want to wait. We wanted to be able to get out the door with what we believe customers would truly love about Kindle, that great experience of finding out about a book or an author in conversation, being able to access it and start reading it in under 60 seconds. So in parallel to our cart-based structure, we built our, I guess, like you could argue that it was a purely duplicative model of what we wanted and needed to deliver Kindle books, and that was the digital shopping experience. And that is just finding a book, clicking on it, and getting it wired. There were some trade-offs with that, of course. One was we asked customers to just choose one credit card, one payment option for the books that they were buying, rather than have in the cart system, have a lot of choice. And that was okay by customers. We checked in with them and asked, of course, and tested those ideas. There's also not the notion of inventory, right? We're talking about a digital file. So a lot of the things that we were able to stand up and move really quickly in this digital shopping feature kind of circumvented inventory and all of the systems that were built to optimize that in the cart. So we did this in order to deliver this incredible experience with Kindle, knowing that it was a parallel system. But as we were doing it, we also knew that we had to build moments in time as we released to really then sit down with those who owned the e-commerce, our cart-based system, to really understand, all right, over time, what features can we start aggregating? We didn't let that slow us up at first. We built it, we launched it, but over time, this was something that we did need to come back and really build a mechanism to understand what could we build back into and unify the system a little bit so we weren't just purely building technical debt. But that's kind of the notion of how this two is greater than none work, and how sometimes we do have to make those trade-offs of accruing this debt in order to deliver incredible innovations for customers. So now I'll talk a little bit more about the more inner workings of teams, and as I mentioned, talk about different flavors of them. And one I'll talk about is the difference between a single-threaded owning team, two-pizza team, and a single-threaded leading team. It's a subtle but yet really important difference. The single-threaded ownership model is really, I think, the most prevalent nature of teams at Amazon. And this is everything that I had mentioned before, where they have a single-threaded focus on a single customer set and a single offering or feature. And that way, their roadmaps aren't as congested as they would be if they're solving multiple problems. Again, they're resourced the way that they need to be, ensuring that they have not just what they need now, but as leaders of these teams think through the future and as the service grows, what they need to change and add to teams necessarily as the product becomes more mature or different use cases arise that they want to address. And I mentioned that they need to own what they launch. And so again, this classical single-threaded ownership model of two pizza teams owns the resources themselves and has that all encapsulated in one team. And that helps really drive continuous innovation. It allows these teams to constantly launch. And that's another feature of how we organize teams. We want these teams to launch early and often. It's an iterative approach rather than a big bang approach. We'll focus on that MLP, that most lovable feature or product. We'll launch, we will want to really nail that experience, but it may not be perfect. In the Kindle, for example, the first device was a little clunky, actually, right? But what mattered was the reading experience. And so we focused a lot of that development effort on that over-the-air delivery. So being able to launch quickly and learn not only allows your teams to get innovation out the door much quicker, but it also lowers the cost of failure in a lot of ways, because you're learning constantly about what customers like and don't, and you're able to iterate and build that into kind of your roadmap, which you wouldn't necessarily be able to do if you had that big bang approach of product release. So that's what a single-threaded ownership team, two-pizza team is at Amazon. That purely encapsulated, owning all the resources, staying as close as you can to your customers, and innovating quickly on their behalf. Let's contrast that to this other flavor of this notion of a single-threaded leader team. And much like the single-threaded ownership team, single-threaded leader teams are focused on one particular piece of a service or a customer set. And really, they have to wake up every day and really think through, what are the best feature sets? What do customers really want? How do we keep in AWS our products secure and performant? The main difference of a single-threaded leadership team is that they don't own the resources. They have to rely on these other single-threaded owning teams to actually execute their vision and roadmap on their behalf. And there's a great reason for this, of why you would want to structure a team who owns the vision for a product or service but doesn't own the actual resources to execute it. And an example comes from our AWS businesses in identity and access management, or IAMS. Again, this is a team that owns all of the, not just the product and feature set, but all of the governance around it, making sure that it's secure and updated and ensure that the roadmap is consistent. But then once they have that vision of not just what it is and where they want it to go, they will need to hand that off to single-threaded ownership teams to then execute. And every two-pizza team that has its resources actually needs to budget a little time to integrate these important features and updates that identity and access management come out with. And one of the reasons why we have this structure is because it's, at the end of the day, much better for customers. If you think about having this team, this identity and access management team, have that as really driven by individual services across 200 plus features, what you may risk is divergence in experience. Again, we move fast. There aren't as many mechanisms of making sure that we have these matrix communications. A team may start to build their own versions of what IAMS looks like. And for a customer, you want that same ability to be able to set identity and access management the same across all services, be able to have it interoperate cleanly and efficiently, be able to have control over that, then potentially have to deal with different flavors of IAMs depending on the service. So that's one of the main benefits of why we organize into these single-threaded leading teams that don't own the resources. They are focused on making these services the best they can be, but at the end of the day, that's much better for customers if they then hand it over to single-threaded owning teams to then execute. So that's what happens in general of how we organize, but what happens as a service grows? What are the things, like you can't, surely EC2 doesn't run on a single two-pizza team. Well, it doesn't, and as a service grows, it goes through a natural mitosis. You might find that you're going to need to have a lot more resources to be able to impact innovation and drive new features on behalf of customers. And as you do that, what you risk if you're just adding resources to a single two-pizza team is everything that I mentioned makes two-pizza teams great, right? You'll start to slow it down. Its roadmap will be much more crowded. You'll start to actually just create overhead in communication and decision-making. And so as a business grows, instead of just creating bigger teams, we'll look at individual pieces of that service and look to basically split them up so that we retain a focus on a single subset of those features. So an example might come, I'll use our retail experience again. in thinking about our Echo family of devices. If you think about the buying experience for this Echo Dot, for example, you will have different options like different payment options, one-time or monthly payments. You have things that are surfaced about where you want it delivered, how fast that can be depending on inventory or other selections that you might make as a customer. There's gift options. Well, if you think about that, the web team, the team that's owning this face-out service to customers, there are a single two-pizza team that is just dedicated to things like ensuring that the right price with the right taxes is showing up, ensuring that the shipping speeds that are shown to you as a customer are relevant based off of inventory and other things. There's a single team that's just focused on those gift options or the payment options and financing. So again, splitting apart these teams to have them focused on individual parts enables all of those teams just to run faster with features and innovations for that subservice in a much faster way than if we had this all encapsulated in one gigantic web services team. So the question might then become, as you have so many different two-pizza teams running fast, how can you possibly govern them, right? Like, what does the leadership layer look like? And this is some of how we think through organizing multiple two-pizza teams in a logical approach. And in that, we create these leaders who may own a kind of portfolio of two-pizza teams that are related to each other in their approach and in their structure. So using EC2 again as an example, you might have a team that is looking at the size and footprint of the virtual machines that are allocated to compute. And you also might have a different team who is looking at new feature sets for EC2 or for these virtual machines. And these might be co-located under a single threaded leader who will then own the business strategy. They really aren't, at the end of the day, they set the kind of like what are the most important things that we want to deliver for customers. This is the business vision. And then they will let these two pizza teams figure out the how to execute that vision and maintain their autonomy about being able to set their own KPIs and set their own goals. That is kind of, I think, at least in other companies that I've worked at, a little bit disruptive in some ways, right? We have a lot of trust that goes along with these teams that they're setting their goals in the right manner. If you're asking a team to really own the customer experience, they're going to want to be able to set aggressive goals. And that's also where this layer of leadership comes in, to make sure that those goals are aggressive enough, that they do map towards the greater vision, and enables these leaders not just to be roadblock removers and ensure that their teams have everything they need to continue to move fast, but then be able to have that governance layer where they're able to look across to other leaders within, let's say, the EC2 business, and kind of look at where their teams are developing and be able to make resourcing or headcount allocations accordingly. So that's how we kind of look to co-locate two pizza teams together naturally and bring that accountability to the table as well. So the question becomes, as a business keeps scaling and scaling, how do you possibly kind of govern that? Like, I think about AWS and how it is super important if you're having teams march very quickly to really have a look-up moment to understand what's being developed. Are there some commonalities where we should be thinking a little bit more unified? And that was pretty important to the senior leadership of AWS, to be able to at least have a mechanism in hand so that teams could understand what's going on without slowing them down. And one of the ideas was, like, wouldn't it be great if we had a weekly business review or a monthly business review where all of the leaders of these teams could come in and share what's going on within their business? That sounds fantastic, but if you think about a service like AWS that has 200 plus services, like that meeting not only is terribly expensive in terms of all of the different leaders you would need, but it would take days to actually execute. So what was a way of innovating and simplifying this method? And the way they came up with was what you see here. They had a mechanism where every team leader needed to prepare a document. And I'll get to kind of our narrative culture in a second, but they needed to be able to come in prepared to speak, not just about the data and what's going on with where they were and what trends they were seeing in the business, but really inspecting it and bringing a customer voice to the table as well. So every service leader needed to work with their teams to create a document across all of these 200 services. And they had to be prepared to present when they walked in the room. But to solve the problem of time, they created this wheel where all the services were identified on it, and they would just spin the wheel a couple of times, and where it landed, those service leaders would have to present. For those who didn't have to present, they still sunk these documents in a central repository so that teams could access them and look at them and see what are the trends and some of the difficulties and problems that these teams were coming up against and how they solved them. But it helped really streamline not just what teams were focused on, what they were bringing to the table, but then this inspection mechanism on a weekly basis to be able to bring this type of inspection and bring things to the table for other teams to see. And over time, we iterated this process as well. I think they made it digital, and I think it's available on GitHub if you are interested in kind of downloading a similar wheel for your business. That should be available, in open source. So now I'll dive a little bit deeper into some of the specific mechanisms that teams and teams leaders use in order to create even deeper inspection and innovation on their teams. And I mentioned our narrative culture. And that is a key hallmark of Amazon. Rather than sit down and create these PowerPoint presentations and walk like let's say another team or an audience through it, where you're only seeing the data that I, as the PowerPoint creator, want you to see, we actually take the time to write documents, to come up with potentially these 2 to 6 page documents where it's not just telling you about like what the innovation we want to build is or what problems in the business is. It's very data oriented. And having it in a document makes that clear to everybody. You can't write a narrative without being crisp and articulate in how you are expressing the problem or the innovation that you want to drive in your business. Having this as a mechanism may seem counterintuitive because it does take time to write a document. But by slowing down, it actually enables us to go faster. It enables any team or an individual person to come to the table with a well-thought-out document and then to drive discussion in that meeting itself around like what are the problems we want to solve, what is this innovation, how are we gaining feedback from it, and this helps drive a lot of diverse viewpoints as well. Unlike a PowerPoint where it's usually one person doing most of the talking, people will sit down in these meetings and spend the first 20 minutes of an hour doc read just reading and doing what you see here, scribbling it up and marking it. And the rest of the time then fosters that dialogue. And this is also where our leadership principles come back. We use that to challenge the idea. Are we thinking big enough? Are we moving fast enough? Why are we doing this now as opposed to potentially waiting for a better feature or another type of kind of release that we might want to pursue? So having a document and a narrative culture enables this crystal clarity around the idea, but also then enables this great diverse viewpoints that help sharpen the idea as well. So I'm going to talk about some of these narratives specifically in how they're leveraged within Two Pizza teams. And I'll talk about 3 in general across 3 different approaches: a strategic type of document, one that's used for operations, and another for maybe new launch. And I'll start with the strategic document, which is our PRFAQ doc, or our press release frequently asked questions document. And this is a document that's used whenever a team has a new feature, or actually it's brand new innovation that they want to bring. Actually, if it's just an iteration or additions to features of something that's already launched, they may not want to use this as opposed to maybe a different type of narrative. This is really used for when it's a brand new initiative. And there are 3 parts of this document. It starts with a press release. And out of the 6-page document, the press release is just 1 page. It can't go over one page. I've seen meetings end when, like, hey, your press release is 2 pages, let's come back, at a time where you're able to actually condense them. Again, force that clarity of thought, because that's what the press release does. It makes us leap into the future and really think through what is going to excite customers. What do we think they'll say about this? And are we able to articulate, number one, who the customer is, number two, what their biggest pain point that they're experiencing, and then number three, how our new release, our new invention or offering helps solve that problem. And by having that as a one-page, crisp, kind of written press release, that is really instructive. It helps us leap into our customers' shoes, to really imagine what this looks like. So where the press release is one page, the FAQ, or frequently asked questions, can be 4 or 5 pages. And we have 2 different types of frequently asked questions within this document. The first are those really hard questions we know customers are going to ask. Not just, how much is this, or what do I do if it breaks, or how do I use this with other AWS services, but why do I need this, right? How is this going to change a problem in my life? And again, being able to ask those questions and write down the answer, again, helps the team really think through and articulate the value proposition of that product or service, and ensures that it absolutely is targeted towards the biggest customer need. The second set of frequently asked questions are those really hard questions that internal people are going to ask. And these could be leaders, these could be colleagues, but again, not just how this maps back to our business goals, how does this get us to our 3 to 5 year plan, but again, what did we consider and reject in favor of spending the time and resources on this? Again, why do we think customers are going to want this? What else exists out there that really isn't doing the job and makes us confident that this idea is going to meet that need? So again, these are really kind of tough questions, and the nature of sitting down and writing them out are really, really instructive. And finally, with visuals, picture tells 1,000 stories, and again, as these teams are asked to own a feature or service end-to-end, outlining what that customer experience is absolutely helps not just the team think through it, but then help articulate it to others as they're reading this document. So it's a great way of democratizing innovation. Anybody with a paper or pen or finger and keyboard can come to the table with this idea. And there's thousands of these PR FAQs that are kind of circulating at any given time along colleagues and different teams, gaining that feedback, crisping up the idea as they go to the time when then it gets put in front of senior leadership for investment discussions. All right, I'll move along to an example of an operational narrative that's used, and this one's called a correction of errors, and it's really used when in postmortem, but more particularly not just to any postmortem, but where something goes wrong, when something fails, when something hits the customer and impacts them. We ask the team that owns that service to sit down and write a document about it. And it isn't the name, blame, and shame game. We're not asking that team to write that document because they're responsible for the failure, but rather as I mentioned, they're the ones who are going to be closest to the customer. They're going to know what the impact to that customer was. They know the ins and outs of these services and are able to get with other stakeholders in the business and rally what happened and what went wrong and what the team did to fix it to make sure it doesn't go wrong in the future. And it also creates an artifact, again, that's shareable, that other people can read and learn from, because that is crucial when you have single independent teams moving fast. You need to have a mechanism of learning from failure of what went wrong. And that's indicative in a great quote, again, from Jeff. If you ever wanted a glimpse into our culture, every year we release a shareholder letter that Jeff wrote and now Andy Jassy writes. They're great peeks into the culture. And in this one in 2015, Jeff talked about the nature of failure and the nature of empowering teams to be able to fail. And he mentions that failure and invention are inseparable twins. You can't set up this type of organizational structure where you're asking teams to move fast and innovate on behalf of their customers without understanding that there is going to be failure. Like an experiment isn't an experiment if you know what's going to happen at the end of the day. You're going to go through these failures. And that's what a correction of error document really helps with, is encapsulating what went wrong. And here's some of the elements within a correction of errors document. One is what happened, right? The who, what, when, where, and why of what went wrong with the service. Also dives deep into the data of the impact to customers. And that really understands the quantitative piece of what impacted your customer. How big was this failure, and what did it enable or not enable a customer to do during this? What was that impact? What did that really do to customers? How did that maybe potentially disrupt the trust that we have with customers? And what about the service went wrong and hit the customers in different ways? And then what are the contributing factors that led up to this failure? And this, can be like that classic Toyota 5 Whys from the Jidoka, quality control, right? Peeling away the different layers of why things went wrong. Like we might have had a service outage, for example. Why did we have that service outage? Was it that we didn't have the right mechanisms for, let's say, a scale event, or did something unexpected happen? And why did that something unexpected happen? Why didn't we have, let's say, the right alarms and processes to catch that in time? And by peeling back all those layers, you get to a root cause. And that enables this team who's writing this correction of errors to really fix that, and not just put a Band-Aid on it, but really fix that underlying root cause so this type of thing that hit our customers doesn't ever happen again. And what are the big lessons that team learned? What are the different resource considerations that they might have that they might need to kind of address this going into the future? So again, like just outlining what the team did to address it is hugely instructive, and as a document enables other teams to learn from that failure. And by the way, having this mechanism also helps with the resiliency of the service. We actually build a lot based off of what we learn into other services, right? So to continually increase the resiliency, not just of a single product, but across all products, based off of this mechanism of sharing of some of our failures. I'll go into the last part of what we do for a new launch, and this may look a little bit familiar. You might have a similar process of what needs to be in place when you launch a new feature, but talk about what that looks like at AWS. And there are three main areas that we ask a team to dive deeply and answer very particular questions across three dimensions before they launch a service. The first is really about the architecture of that service. And it includes, of course, creating the entire map of APIs and other services that are involved in delivering this service to customers. That helps call out the dependencies that might be inherent in the system and understand like what you may need to do architecturally wise, like what you need to build in order to ensure redundancy and a really robust architectural structure. You will have to outline what happens when you have soft failures, or when a service is partially available, or what happens when there's a hard failure, when a service becomes unavailable. All before a service launch, like what are the SOPs, what is the escalation path that's needed, and have that purely articulated, who owns what, right even before we launch. They also need to come up with detailed forecasts of customer demand and the results of multiple load testing that was done, and where some breakage points might be, and what the team built behind it to ensure that if we ever get to those breakage points, what is inherent in how we deal with them and how we improve those breakage points going forward as well. And also really what happens when a service shutdown happens. What's the associated recovery time? Plans for restarting the service. What are the contingencies that are built into the architecture to prevent loss of data or other types of redundancy? So again, really going deep across kind of high priority, medium priority, kind of lower priority kind of questions, but you need to answer all of them, right? The second part of this is really around release quality and procedures. So not just kind of what the architecture looks like, but what are the mechanisms and systems that the team has to deploy and scale once it's out in the wild? What are the mechanisms that a team's going to use for code changes? How are they approved? How are best practices shared across those? For automatic rollbacks or kind of service breaches of SLA, what does that look like? What are the SOPs and rule books built behind them that teams are going to follow? All this has to be written prior to launching. And the last part of it really is about incident and event management. Again, what happens when something goes wrong? What are the alarms that you have within the system? What are the training and on-call systems that you have? Do you have the metrics that are going to be suitable for measuring incident events? And if you don't have a way of measuring them, how are you going to deal with that, right? Like, how are you going to measure the unmeasurable? So all of these need to be kind of put together and reviewed prior to a service launch. So with that, I hope you saw how all of these elements kind of come together, the people, the process, the tools, how we thought through over time, how and why we organized into this way, some of the kind of drawbacks to it and how we thought through it, and then some of the specific mechanisms that these teams use. So hopefully that gave you a lot greater insight and maybe provide some inspiration around how things work within your organization as well. Thank you so much. If you're interested in other types of these approaches about how we think through things, specifically with a cultural lens, there's a bunch of different sessions throughout our catalog that you can go to throughout reInvent. And just want to thank you once again for all your time. And please fill out a survey for the event. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.